So let's talk about Cuba. You've got a nation of 11 million people, and right now it is teetering on the edge of collapse. And right at the heart of this crisis is a huge geopolitical standoff involving the United States, Russia, and China. In this explainer, we're going to break down what's really going on and why this matters so much. And it really all comes down to this one central question. After decades of an embargo, why is the United States pushing Cuba to the absolute brink right now? The answer? Well, it's probably not what you're thinking.
Okay, so first up, let's just take a look at what's actually happening on the ground in Cuba. Because for 11 million people, the country is quite literally running on empty.
I mean, just imagine this. The country has only a few weeks of fuel left. That's it. So everything is grinding to a halt. You've got foreign airlines canceling flights because, hey, they can't refuel. Universities are actually shutting down. Public transport? Forget about it. This isn't just some abstract economic problem, you know? This is a full-blown humanitarian crisis, and it's happening in real time. So you might be asking, how on earth did things get this bad so quickly? Well, this timeline right here is key. It all kicked off in late 2025. That's when the U.S. basically severed Cuba's main oil lifeline from Venezuela. Then, things escalated, fast. You have the capture of Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro, and right after that, a U.S. executive order comes out, officially calling Cuba a threat to national security. It was this 1-2-3 punch that directly led to the fuel crisis we're seeing today.
Okay, so the U.S. has already cut off the fuel supply, so what's the end game here? What's the goal? Now, your first thought might be, oh, it's got to be about resources, right? But the truth is, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Now here's where it gets kind of confusing. If you look at Venezuela, it has the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Makes sense. But Cuba? It doesn't really have significant oil. Sure, it's got some valuable minerals. It actually has the world's third largest reserve of cobalt. But that doesn't seem to be what the U.S. is after here. So this whole thing probably isn't about resources. Which of course brings us right back to that big question. If it's not about oil, if it's not about minerals, then what is really driving this intense pressure campaign against Cuba? Well, the answer has less to do with economics and a whole lot more to do with history and power.
It all comes down to something called the Trump Doctrine. Now, this is basically a modern version of the Monroe Doctrine, which, if you remember from history class, is a 200-year-old U.S. policy that was all about America being the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. The current administration has dusted it off, really, to push back against the growing influence of rivals. We're talking China and Russia in its own neighborhood. And Cuba? Well, Cuba is seen as the perfect test case for reasserting that American dominance.
And you know, the Cuban historian Luis Perez Jr. absolutely nails it with this quote. He basically says that if you look at U.S. policy over the years, through all the different presidents and strategies, there's one thing that never changes, this determination to deny Cuba the right to control its own future. It's not about a specific resource, it's not about a particular leader, it's about the fundamental idea of sovereignty. So, if this is all about dominance, what does the endgame even look like? Because honestly, Washington is sending some really mixed signals. On the one hand, you hear whispers of a potential deal. But on the other hand, their actions look like they're designed to make the whole country just collapse.
Most analysts see this playing out in one of three ways. Option 1, a negotiated deal. Think Trump, the master negotiator, trying to get some huge concessions. Option 2, social collapse. The idea is that the embargo just keeps squeezing until society breaks down from the inside. And then there's option 3, leadership change. We're talking a Venezuela-style effort to just flat-out replace the government. And obviously, each of those paths leads to a very, very different place.
All right, let's just say a deal is actually on the table. What would the U.S. even be asking for? Well, the demands are pretty huge. We're talking free elections, the release of all political prisoners, freedom of speech, and an end to any support for groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. I mean, these aren't small tweaks. These are demands for fundamental, systemic change in Cuba. And that right there, that's the core of the problem. That's the stalemate. From the Cuban government's perspective, agreeing to these terms would be political suicide. It's like one analysis said it's basically asking the regime to sign its own death sentence. So you can see why a real good faith negotiation seems, well, almost impossible at this point.
So with Cuba basically backed into a corner, you have its old allies, Russia and China, starting to step into the ring. But the big question for everyone is, just how far are they really willing to go to throw Cuba a lifeline?
China's response, for its part, has been fast and very real.
They've already put together an emergency aid package. We're talking $80 million in cash and a massive 60,000 tons of rice. So this isn't just them saying the right things for the cameras. This is a tangible, actual lifeline for a country that is staring down a massive food and fuel crisis.
But what's really interesting is the completely different ways China and Russia are handling this. China is being super public about it. Their foreign ministry is out there saying, "We firmly support Cuba." They're framing it as a defense of sovereignty. Russia, on the other hand, is being much, much quieter. The Kremlin will admit that talks are happening, sure, but they are playing their cards very close to the vest. They're not giving anything away.
But, and this is a big but, here's the reality check. Most experts agree there is a very clear limit to how far this support will go. Neither Russia nor China is probably going to risk their entire incredibly complex relationship with the US over Cuba. So will they provide aid? Yes. But a full-on intervention that puts them head-to-head with the United States, that seems highly, highly unlikely.
And all of this brings us right to where we are today, stuck in this incredibly tense, high-stakes standoff, and the entire future of a nation is just hanging in the balance. When you boil it all down, when you strip away all the details, this entire crisis really comes down to one thing. It is a fundamental clash between two ideas, Cuban sovereignty versus U.S. dominance. And so, that leaves us with the final and most critical question of all. Is this maximum pressure strategy actually going to work for Washington? Or is it going to backfire and have the complete opposite effect, pushing Cuba even closer to America's biggest rivals, Russia and China? The answer to that question, well, it's not just going to decide Cuba's fate, it's going to shape the future of our entire hemisphere.